Welcome to Fifth Dimensional Life, Mass Human Awakening. I'm Lise, your host, and I am so excited. I have Bruce Zen Benefiel with me today. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah. Which guy are you talking to? Bruce? Zen? Yeah.
A little
I
bit of
know by
both.
many names, right?
Oh, that's awesome. And you have all your books in your background too. I'm super excited to deep dive into your background, everything. If you want to just give us a brief summary to start off with of your background and your ET experiences, and we'll go from there.
Well, sure. Well, my background, I'll just start from the beginning. I was orphaned and adopted at birth. And when my sister showed up at 4.5, I found out that I was adopted. So I began developing this inner quest for understanding who I am, who I can talk to, and things of that nature. And actually started up a conversation with the voice within that still has remained nameless to this day, and yet has been ever present in my life since then. So that's been a big help and kind of a blessing and a curse as well.
Yeah.
My ET experiences started happening around 8 years old. I woke up in bed. Actually, I woke up in the corner of my bedroom looking down at my body in bed and watched it throw off the covers and climb out of bed, open my window, climb out, walk across the neighbor's backyard. And I climbed this fence around a 10-acre pasture. And as I'm walking out into the pasture, my physical body starts rising up into the air and I'm able to watch it from a distance, right? So as I look up, there's this orange cigar-shaped cloud that looked like it must have been at least a mile long. And so these were, I wake up in bed the next morning, couldn't wait to go back the very first time it happened. And then this continued to happen over the next couple of years, probably a couple of times a month. And I never really thought about it until many years later. I was preparing to move to Arizona. I grew up in Indiana, and I was walking through a metaphysical bookstore in Muncie, which was close by to where I grew up. And this book falls off the shelf in front of me, and the cover's up. I walk over, and there's nobody else around, right? And so I walk over and I pick the book up, and it's Ruth Montgomery's Strangers Among Us. And I'd never heard of it. It'd just been, so this was 1981. The book, I think, was published in 1978. And so I turn it over, and the very first paragraph that I read says the most common contactee experience in the Midwest in the late 50s and early 60s was the orange cigar-shaped cloud.
Wow.
And so it just kind of went, whoa. That was the beginning of my awareness that there's much more going on in my life than most. And so that has continued. I've had multiple experiences, been on board ship across the universe. And one of the, I suppose, the most intriguing aspects of it was this was in 1971, or I'm sorry, 1991. I was also producing and hosting a television show at the time, and I was interviewing people from all walks of life, including contactees and people who also dealt with etheric implants and things of that nature. And one night I'm ultimately the curious sort, right? And so I'm all of a sudden I wake up and I'm laughing, and I sit up and I'm on this steel gurney, and I've got electrodes lining my sphincter. And I'm laughing. It's like, come on, guys, what do you think you're doing? And there are these three grays that are pushed up against the wall in front of me. Now, at the time, I didn't think about what the effect of my laughter was on them, because they certainly weren't expecting it. Most people arrive in that condition, they're a bit frightful because it's, something new, and here's a completely different environment that they don't understand nor have control of.
Yeah.
However, not for me. I woke up laughing, and as I'm pulling these things out, I'm like, come on, guys, what do you think you're doing? And I get to the last one, and it feels like a slight sting. And then I opened my eyes up again and I'm back in bed. And I'm like, wait a minute, right? You can imagine how it's kind of like, what was the movie? Inception,
Yeah.
right? So, and this was way before it. So I'm laying in bed and I'm thinking, oh man, I just blew it. I had a golden opportunity to actually talk to these folks that I know have been around in my life for most of it, right?
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out how to get back. So I'm closing my eyes and I'm really just intending with every ounce of my being to go back, not knowing how.
Mhm.
And so I find myself in this kind of an indigo space, and I meet up with this male, kind of an androgynous figure that's in a shimmering cloak of full length, I guess, for lack of a better, and it, kind of shimmered rainbow sparkles, but it vacillated between um, shiny black and shiny white,
Hmm.
right? Kind of
Yeah.
what do they call that? I don't know, not effervescing, but some, I understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, but he says to me, next time, just relax. We're just trying to tune you up so we can communicate more easily.
Mhm.
Now, that kind of set me back for a moment, but at the same time, it made perfect sense. I had been studying the anatomy and the nervous system with my girlfriend at the time, who was studying to be a massage therapist, and she was getting ready to go through her testing. And so one of the things that we had been studying the previous week was the nervous system. And so I knew that the perineum nerve ends in the sphincter in the genitals, and it's the only direct connect into the tip of the spine.
Hmm.
So if you were an advanced race that were able to subtly manipulate a vibratory rate or, a general frequency of one's body,
Yeah.
how would it happen? Where would you plug in, literally,
Yeah.
right? And so it just made really a lot of sense.
Mhm.
And it also explained why people would sense or feel that there was some kind of sexual experimentation going on. Because when you ramp your vibe up like that, the first thing that usually happens is you'll have an orgasm.
Mhm.
So there's this, because we aren't able to speak about our genitals or sexual experiences or things like that openly, it's thought of to, be really taboo. So we've got all this suppressed energy and conversations that we're not having. And so the first thing that happens is we think negatively of it.
Yeah.
And we make all these kinds of assumptions that we're being experimented upon, not really understanding that this is one way for them to accelerate our vibratory rate, even just subtly. We're subtle energy beings. So when we adjust our vibratory rate subtly, it opens up vast worlds, or
Yeah.
can, right? So those kinds of things um, I've been privy to and been able to have the understanding and share those. I'm not necessarily too popular with that either, right? Because people like to be in fear.
Yeah. It gives just a whole bunch of brain chemicals that
Right.
release,
The
and it's
drama trauma,
addictive.
the
Yeah.
cortisol,
Yeah.
really constricts the brain. And where in my experiences, it's been like a release of serotonin and oxytocin and all the
Yeah.
kinds of things that bring that joy and expanded experience that stems from being fearless, because there really isn't any reason to be afraid.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's so interesting. I've heard your story a couple times, and it's just amazing each time, though. It, kind of gives you shivers. Um,
I'm sure it does. Now,
yeah.
in fast forwarding, so that was 1991. In 2010, I am the guys show up again, right?
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen them for a long time or felt them. And one night I'm laying in bed on my stomach, and all of a sudden I feel them enter the room, and I'm like kind of wide awake, but not in
Yeah.
that moment, right? I'm fully conscious and I'm aware that they're there, and I greet them and I'm like excited because they're there. And I'm like, okay, guys, what's going on? And they said, well, we're here to give you an upgrade. Now, the thing about these guys is they're not too conversant. They don't have cursory conversations. They
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
stick to business. So they said, well, we're here to give you an upgrade. And I'm like, okay, what's that? And then all of a sudden I feel this slight pressure on my occipital lobe and a very high pitched sensation that goes along with it. And it just reverberates in my cranium. And it felt really cool, is all I can
Mhm.
say. And then they finish up and they're like, okay, we're done. We're out of here. And so I wake my girlfriend up, tell her about it. I get up and I write about it, and then I just let it sit. Now, that was May 8th of 2010.
Mhm.
And the following February, we were at the International UFO Congress, which is at that point was at the Fort McDowell Casino,
Cool.
about a half hour away in
Mhm.
North Scottsdale, or Fountain Hills. And I had been facilitating a discussion group at the Mesa Firehouse for about a year and a half at that point. And I'd got a bunch of people to go in together and get a vendor table. So there were 4 or 5 of us there, and I had walked off to listen to Richard Dolan speak for a little bit and came back. And one of the gals, her name was Aya Bodner, and she walks up to me. She's from Sweden originally, and very sensitive. And she walks up, she goes, yeah, I've been asking about I've been asking my guides about you. And I'm like, okay, cool. Because I love it when I get vetted by people, because I never know what they're going to say, but it's always cool.
Yeah.
And so she says, yeah, they didn't really tell me anything initially, but they showed me this diamond shape in the back of your head with a small one above it and a smaller one below it. And they told me that you were plugged into the cosmic computer. Right. So I didn't have, here's this reference, right, from somebody that I hadn't said a word to. And they're talking about this plug in the back of my
Wow.
head, which is exactly where these guys had done the upgrade.
Mhm.
So what's the cosmic computer? Well, years ago, this was in 2000, I'd met Dan Winter, and he was traveling around. And he and I had a chance to have a private conversation together. And I really liked the guy, brainiac that we both are. So we commiserated about stuff. And one of the things that he said was that Ashtar was the acronym for the cosmic computer. At the time, I just kind of blew it off because I'm still the ultimate skeptic of all of this. It's like, yeah, right. Okay, let's move on. How's it, what's real,
Yeah.
right? And so that kind of, I never asked him, well, what's the acronym actually mean? And other than being the cosmic computer. So as I pondered that over the years, and I realized that, there is this intrinsic intelligence, and it's multidimensional. There are many planes of consciousness, and each one of those planes has kind of a resident consciousness and purpose along with it. And one of the processes I'd gone through, all this was back in 1989, was called the multi-plane awareness. And it was a process developed by William Swigart. And it basically took the participant through a guided session and through different planes of consciousness, 9 of them in total. And what it does is it allows the participant to integrate with each body on each of those planes of consciousness, which I found fascinating and readily available. So there's all these constructs that we don't necessarily understand, but yet they are available to experience. Now, we also, we look for evidence, right? So where's the science behind that? And so that was 1989. 2010, there was a piece of work produced or published by Vernon Neppy and Edward Close called the Triadic Dimensional Distinction Vortical Paradigm, in which, and this is a quantum physics model, right? And they are saying that, or positing, that consciousness, space, and time are tethered across 9 dimensions. for our human experience. Now, that doesn't
Yeah.
preclude the notion that there are more dimensions beyond that. It just says in our human consciousness, this is what we're able to experience. And so, here's another reference
Fascinating.
right now.
Yeah.
So how does this all fit? Right. And in that, we hear about the points of light, right? And that we each have this point of light inside of us. Well,
Yeah.
when you consider the 12th plane of that multiplane awareness experience, for myself and for all the others that I know of that have gone through it, it's white light. So we have that point of light within us that basically bounces back and forth between incarnation and the great light until we understand the memo that we are this multidimensional being and that we have a definitive, or should I say, a perfected form, fit, and function in the world that we can essentially acquiesce to. It's not something that we push or pull. It's something that's designed in our own being.
Oh.
And I know that that's a lot to digest.
Yeah, it's very profound.
Well, when you've had this, I entered the light at 18 through asking if I could know truth, and I was willing to die for it if necessary. And on 11/11 in 1975, I did. And so two things that I realized from that, one was that there is no death, right? Because you can still think, even though you may not have a body.
Yeah.
And that we are all cosmic consciousness condensed into form. So this was that 1975 is when I first learned this. So I've had 40 some odd years to really kind of wrestle and cogitate and ask questions and peer into the depths of what keeps me afraid of knowing, and so there's all of these layers of becoming fearless.
Yeah.
And ultimately realizing that in that freedom, there is no need for fear because the universe is just energy.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we have this ability to qualify that energy through our feelings and thoughts, right? So we can choose how to perceive things, which is a phenomenal power.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on like humanity in general, and like, I guess, do you get downloads
All
of
right,
like
now we're really screwed, aren't we? All right.
But you didn't say. Yeah.
Well, there's two sides of this. One is, as with everything, right? We have the opportunity of growing tremendously. We've been taught over and over again over the last couple of years to fear each other. And there's this narrative that's been pushing for this. And yet there's something underneath all of that, that people who've had the opportunity to sit still for a while from the obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration, right? We've had this opportunity to just sit with things and to ponder really who we are and what we stand for and how connected we really are, and looking for that evidence. And science even has been demonstrating that, we're all connected. There's this idea that we aren't really physical beings. There's 99% space, right? So in that space, there's this prevalent consciousness that's available. Now, how do we tap into that? Well, we ask questions and we shut up.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
We can't answer questions with information we don't have, and yet there's this intrinsic understanding through all the spiritual teachings that this inner knowing is available. Right? We just have been bereft of inquiry and trust of it because we tend to allow the outer circumstances to control us in some way, shape, or form.
Distractions too.
Right.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on, like, as you mentioned before in a different session, you said that there's no malevolent or like evil extraterrestrials that are
Correct.
like here on Earth or like out
Anywhere.
anywhere.
Anywhere, because to reach the level of consciousness that is necessary to travel through space and time, there can be no malevolence, right? It's a frequency response
Yeah.
in order to be able to do that. Now, we don't have, because we're of our limited consciousness, we don't have the understanding of how that all works, right?
Yeah.
However, I have been in so many different places and experienced hundreds of different races, and none of them have ever held any inkling of malevolence. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have really strong energy, right?
Yeah.
In that, in the experience or the confrontation, if you will, of that energy, when one becomes present and we have to deal with that, the first thing that often happens is a fight or flight syndrome.
Yeah.
Right. Because we get hit with that energy and it's so strong that we butt pucker. Right. And we go, oh my God. Right. And so that's our perception of it. And so we tend to want to project that that's a negative energy because it's caused us to be fearful. Well, that's our choice to be fearful.
Very
There
true.
really is no evidence that it's there to harm us. And when we release, open up, just, and enter that stillness within, the lines of communication just expand unbelievably.
Yeah.
Right. And there's this rapid fire. They don't like English. They don't like language, period. First of all, because it's too easily misunderstood. Frequency, on the other hand, is not. Imagery, all of this, the internal visceral experience that is provided through this communication medium that they are able to engage with us, give us the opportunity of, a lot of people call downloads, right? Where there's this rapid fire interaction and we have that ability to operate at light speed and beyond. There's this, years ago, I had the question of where the Trinity fits. And I was going through another type of Swigart experience, and my guide, Zephyr, shows up. He says, come. And so I leave my body and we're traveling through the universe together. And we have a conversation about where we're going. And he says, just wait, you'll see. So we eventually show up at this 3-sun system that has a dozen or so lush green planets around it. And the comparison in size, these spheres were exponentially bigger. And as I'm at the perimeter looking at this scene, I felt like alien contact, right? Where tears must have been streaming down my face because I was in awe of this sight. And then I hear a voice, several as one, and they say, we are not only your forefathers, we're also the forefathers of your solar system. And I start to ask questions, being the insatiably curious one. And Zephyr says, oh, that's it. You got all you need. You'll figure it out. Right. And I'm like, oh, shit. Right. So back we come. Now, the reason I mentioned that was because of the speed of thought. And the reference is it took us 8 minutes to get there and 8 minutes to get back because the facilitator sitting next to me timed it.
Wow.
Just as a reference. And so my curiosity then led me to try to find what the speed of thought is. Now, the only reference that I'd been able to find for it was in the Urantia book. And it says it's 841 trillion miles per second. So if we traveled like that here on the planet, it would seem like we were able to teleport instantly. Now, I don't know that we have that ability yet. Some do, right? There are some who have been able to bilocate. I've experienced bilocation. I've experienced teleportation. So I know it's possible, but it's also not necessary yet, right? Because we still have to learn how to get along and manage our planet and our
Yeah.
people in such a way that we're worthy of having interaction from other realms,
Yeah.
right? Because right
Absolutely.
now we're still seen as barbaric. We can't get along with each other. How can we get
Yeah.
along with anybody else? And that's a prerequisite for entering any kind of universal status.
Yeah. Do you think humanity will get there, like even in our lifetime?
Well, part of what happened for me in that experience with the white light in 1975 was I was told that I'm here along with all these other points of light to help facilitate a new world order and that it would happen in my lifetime. Now, I went for 40 years wondering if it was ever going to happen, and then COVID hits. All right. And there's this great, some are calling it a great reset. I have a good friend at Swami Beyondananda, Steve Behrman's his name. He calls it the great we set. Right.
I like it.
And so it gives us the opportunity to really consider how we're behaving towards each other. Right. And now it's even come full circle with the events that are going on in Europe now. And so I would love to say yes, that this will happen. Now, one of the things that I do know, and that Wilbert Smith's book and his references to talking with people from elsewhere, he was he ran Canada's UFO investigation unit. It was called Project Magnet back in the 1950s, and he had discussions with people from elsewhere. One of the things that they said to him was that time, actually, in their way of seeing it, is a measurement in the change of entropy. Right? So when we consider that the more harmonious we can become with each other, right, the less entropy there is, we've assumed that the natural decay of systems causes entropy or is entropy. That doesn't necessarily make it so. That's just our perception of it. Now, if we look at things as their own design and that there's a natural design in it that is in a state of harmony and there are no anomalies to it, then we can acquiesce into this truncated time frame that actually empowers this true new world order to emerge, which is what we're designed in the core of our being to get along, to be in harmony with the universe, right? That's this whole inner awareness, and some have called it the kingdom within, right? It's the same stuff. What used to be called living in spirit, because what we know now about science, can be termed living in quantum entanglement with a unified field. Now, being able to experience that then is something that we don't necessarily understand, but there's indicators in such items as synchronicities, right? Or when you have questions and you have these deep, curious questions about life and your connection with it, what your purpose is, what your mission is, who your love is, what your relationships are all about, and how to serve in that. Well, those questions are automatically answered by the living of the answer, not necessarily, the data dump, right? It's the synchronicities that lead you to the next question or the next layer of understanding and how to apply your specific skill set in the world in a better fashion.
I find it's like a scavenger hunt. You get one little clue and then another and another and another, and you're like, okay, and sometimes you go off the hunt because you're just like,
well, you get distracted. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's so cool.
The point is, though, is that we continue to move in this direction, and that we know there's something better, that we know there is this love and admiration and care and compassion that we have for each other beyond anything, right? We know that we just want to love and be loved. So how do we behave that way? And do we start by just being a good human, right? And what's that mean? Right? What would your definition, and then maybe your audience too, just think about this. What's your definition of being a good human?
a really good question.
Right. So, and the same comes from above and inside. I don't know that there's any differentiation between, other planetary worlds and the inner space of consciousness, which has all that is teeming with life.
Yeah.
Right. And all kinds of different levels. So this experience that we have gives us the opportunity to see a greater reality, to experience a greater reality, and maybe even to, dip our toe, like my book, Stubbing My Toe on Purpose, right? That toe meaning theory of everything. And if we're willing to test that, to have the questions, to be willing to sacrifice our belief system if it doesn't work for us.
Yeah.
Right. This is where the induction into the organized systems of the past have created this disconnect now, where it's like, wait a minute, what you told me or how you told me to live isn't working.
Yeah.
Right. And so what's this dichotomy of I'm supposed to believe this, but yet you're showing me, that there's this something to fear. Well, it's either love or fear. You can't have both.
Absolutely. What do you feel that humanity needs to know to move forward?
That we're all designed the same.
Yeah.
Right? At the core level, we're all the same. Consider this, right? So those three sons were like the macro of the Trinity, right? Which is kind of ubiquitous in all the different religions and thought structures and things of that nature, right? So where does that apply in the micro level?
Yeah.
Right? So interestingly enough, there's the proton, electron, and neutron, which are still just vibrating strings, right? That are made up of vibrating strings. But there's still something, even in that tertiary model, hydrogen doesn't fit. Why is that? Well, hydrogen's also the most prevalent element in the universe. It powers our sun, right? It gives us, it's 2/3 of water, right? It's 70 some odd percent of our air.
Yeah.
It's also the bonding agent for our DNA. Right? So here it is, this element throughout all of these different dots that I just connected. Right? And I often wonder, well, is this possibly where this access to consciousness also resides? Or maybe has access to flow into us? These are things that I don't have the intelligence to really understand the math and the science of all of it. I do have enough intelligence to ask the questions of okay, here's some patterns that show up and they're very similar. So how does this all relate, and how can we internalize this in order to bring us to a greater understanding of how we are all connected and what that feels like? Because ultimately it's that sense that we have. Doesn't matter what we think. Right? Because we can think anything. What matters is the sense that we have, that gut feeling, right? Which is where we connect with everything. And this is kind of, this is the core of the messages that are being offered from across all the different races.
Yeah.
That this is where we need to pay attention first and establish that connection that we have with each other, with life. Namaste in La Ketch. I open my shows up with this, right? And so namaste means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. In La Ketch is a Mayan phrase. It means I am another you. So here's some ancient understanding, right? That's been around for thousands of years. That we're just now having the science show up to where we can maybe think about, hey, maybe this is possible. Right. And here's some evidentiary proof of it from a very practical place, right? It's not just all the new age woo-woo crap,
Yeah.
right? Which has its place. There's that understanding, and I think everybody goes through this understanding and this almost euphoric place of feeling this connection, but not necessarily knowing how to articulate it well enough.
Yeah.
And that in the past, it's all sounded like a bunch of gobbledygook, right?
Yeah.
All this oneness stuff. Well, even in that oneness, right, there are the threads in the tapestry of that each of us are. Now, it doesn't necessarily change the physical structures that we engage or what's on the planet currently, right?
Mm-hmm.
What changes is how we interact with it.
Yeah.
Right? Where we have our attention,
Yeah.
where we put our intention, and then subsequently what the interactions are based on that core value system.
Yeah.
Now that's where we are in the world. We're being confronted with that. Now, the idea of being a good human, being able to step into that is going to take a lot of confrontation of fear.
Yeah.
Right? But what happens in most often when let's say you have this imaginary, you're thinking about, oh my God, I hope this doesn't happen. And then you obsess on this fear and you go through all these internal, rigmaroles and spins and twists and spirals and all this kind of stuff. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute, none of that ever happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Your outer world is still safe. And so you've created all this crap internally, which had no significance in the outer world. It was just your imagination.
Yeah.
Right? Now you still can produce those things, right? Because you can be hell-bent in your own destruction and your self-sabotage patterns. And, there are so many self-development programs that address those things, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And yet, when you get through them, you realize, oh, I do have a choice. And I choose to be whole. I choose to be complete. I choose to love, and I choose to be loved. Well, there's just, again, this inner value system.
Yeah,
so this is where that, we acquiesce to that place. I love that, and we ascend at the speed of surrender to it.
That's beautiful.
It sounds beautiful. It is extremely tough work, right? And we're all facing it right now. So what we need to do is just encourage each other and have that faith, love, and trust that we know is possible, and share that, talk about it, embrace it, and help others to do the same. Now, when you're in the state of conflict, like what's happening right now, and you're having to face the reality that there's bombs bursting in air and on the ground, right? So it's hard to see that and still justify being in that place of faith, love, and trust. Now, what I know, and I believe what many know, is this too shall pass. This is an outer manifestation of what we've had brewing internally for millennia. And now we're in the last phases of this, and understanding that there is no death, there's this outpicturing, or this stage, if you will, that all these actors have agreed to participate in order to make us all aware of how silly we're being.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Kind of like a school, like education.
It is.
Intense version of it.
And even though it looks horrific at the visual material plane level, right? And it is. Then the experience and the excruciating emotions and the physical trauma and things that people go through, that's real.
Mhm.
However,
Yeah.
it's not everything. That, again, that's just on the material plane level. And just from our conversation already, we realize, okay, there's 8 other planes
Yeah.
that are in operation, right?
Mhm.
Now, being able to shift your paradigm to be inclusive of those and see it from a different place then gives us the ability to kind of let go of that outer attachment.
Yeah. Hmm. Well said. I was going to ask you if you have any advice, but that kind of sums it up for me. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to say um, about all this. I've gotten so much great information from it, but if there's any other point that you want to say, and then yeah, I'd love to meet
Yeah,
again.
don't believe everything you think.
Oh yeah, that's a really, really good thing. It's probably
Um,
like one of the top key points ever.
and question
Yeah,
everything. Do not be afraid to question who you are,
yeah,
right? And because if you don't, you'll never find out.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think some people are afraid. Yeah, it brings in that fear part of it too, is like people are like very comfortable in where they are right now. And I feel like a lot of this stuff that's happening is like pushing us so hard to get out of that comfort zone
It is.
and
And we're
past the
afraid of being
fear.
wrong,
Yeah. Yeah,
right? And it's
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, totally.
You know, you can be wrong.
Hmm.
And it's okay. It's and especially if you're wrong about your belief system and how it creates a separative notion that
Yeah.
that somebody else's belief or culture or whatever, means that they're evil or bad. Right.
Hmm.
That's not it at all.
Yeah.
Right. Because if you're seeing it that way, then that badness or that evil is in you.
Yeah, totally.
Right. Because that's what you're seeing. That's what you're projecting, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
So if you want to love or be loved, then behave that way.
Yeah.
Right. It's that simple. And we don't realize, we think, we're dealing with all these complexity systems, right?
Yeah.
And granted, these systems that are in place to manage our planetary resources and our finances and our food distribution systems and our healthcare systems and all of these kinds of things are good systems. They may not be necessarily managed the best way possible yet.
Yeah.
However, this is also part of that silver lining that's coming out of this great reset, where we're realigning. Okay, what is it really going to take? We've got the resources,
Hmm.
right? There is no scarcity, and yet there's this scarcity mentality. Well, how do you overcome that? You look around, you realize, oh, there is abundance. There's land, there's space, there's water. We may need to clean it up a little bit, and we have the technology and the understanding of how to do that,
Yeah.
right? So all of these things are in process, and the attraction that the media is giving to the horrific outer circumstances
Hmm.
doesn't acknowledge what's going on in the background of all these good people that are working diligently behind the scenes
Hmm.
to right the listing ship, so to speak, and to create these systems that ultimately serve humanity,
Hmm.
because we're capable of doing so.
Yeah,
And that's the
absolutely.
whole choice, and I guess the decision that we're being offered now to make is,
Yeah.
how are we going to move forward together? How are we going to be respectful? How are we going to be caring and compassionate
Hmm.
toward each other? And war is not the way. Aggression is not the way. There's even a global peace movement now. It's called Live and Let Live. And their website's at liveandletlive.org.
Hmm.
And it's about basic principles from both legal and moral positions of how to be a better human.
That's awesome.
So this is possible, and it's attractive, right? And there's how can you disagree in any way, shape, or form with the philosophy of live and let live,
Mhm.
right? As long as you're not aggressing, you're not harming one another, then live your own life,
Yeah,
right? It's
absolutely.
okay. You can do whatever you want.
Totally. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I really,
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate having you on here. And yeah, I look forward to collaborating with you again too. And I'll share the link to your website too. And I have your one sheet as well on here. Is there any other links that you want to share or want me to share?
Well, I'm guessing you've got to be the dream, and that's probably,
Mhm.
the challenges that people face right now, I can help with.
Awesome.
And my gift is being able to be in that place and offer an empathic ear, insightful understanding,
Mhm.
helping people to step into this evolved person
Yeah.
in order to be a better human. And the interesting thing about that is your life changes, and you become better acquainted with yourself, with your relationships, your job, even your income,
Yeah.
right? And there's all kinds of things that are available to do that. And
Mhm.
not do I, and I've got the hard and soft skills. I've got a couple of master's degrees in business to back it up. I'm not just speaking from theory.
Yeah.
I can help you restructure your life and put it into a better order.
Awesome. Cool. Oh, that's so great. So yeah, if people are interested, they can always reach out to you. And yeah, I'll have all the links and everything too. Thank you again so much. And I hope you have an amazing day. And I'll, yeah,
Oh,
see
I
you
have and I
soon.
will. And thank you so much,
Yeah.
Lisa. And I look forward to another spiral soon.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.